I'm Matt Miller.
And I'm Hannah Elliott, and this is Hot Pursuit.
All right, on this episode, we are focusing in on one brand.
Laser focus on Aston Martin, and this is really a celebration. Now, we're going to have some critiques, but it's all out of love.
Right, it's a brand that we love, and you probably love. I think everyone loves Aston Martin, but there are important issues from the technology to the price to the business viability of an independent sports car maker in this day and age that we're going to talk about with a former dealer.
My big question, and I've asked Aston Martin this, is I can't figure out why haven't they made profits? I mean, they're not quite profitable yet. So I really want to dig into why that is.
I want to say before we dive into our interview with Steve Serio, who was selling these cars for like 24 years.
Yeah.
I want to hear what our listeners think about Aston Martin because I assume that we all love it, but I don't really know. And we have an email address. What is it?
It's hotpursuit@bloomberg.net. Hotpursuit@bloomberg.net. And also, I kind of want to know about the James Bond thing. Like, does anybody still care that James Bond and Aston Martin were a thing, or is that really in the past?
Right. My question is, if you could have any Aston Martin, and I'm sure most people would like to have one, which one would you take? Right? Would it be the DB5 of Goldfinger?
Obviously.
Would it be, I like the sort of Mustang-shaped Vantage from the 80s?
Yeah.
Okay, let's jump into our interview right now with former Boston Aston Martin dealer Steve Serio.
Once you were, fully entrenched in Aston Martin, Steve, what was it like working with the company, working with England, working as a dealer, and how did what you see affect where they are now? And I'm asking that with the context of course, Aston Martin had their IPO in 2018. They haven't been profitable since. We've seen this is now their fourth CEO since 2020. So there's a lot of executive turnover. We know they have cash problems, all of the things that, you can read about in Bloomberg Intelligence. Can you give us some context about what you saw when you were working with Aston Martin compared to where we are today?
The pleasure of getting involved when I did was that it was a very small company. It was bigger than mom and pop, but it wasn't much bigger. That's in terms of management in the UK. Ford had a great hand in getting the DB7 built, getting, the first gen Vanquish done, the first gen V8, DB7 Vantage, and then DB9. And at that time, a fellow by the name of Bob Dover was leading the company. Ian Callum was the designer. I call that sort of the glory days, and I was lucky enough to be part of what was a real fun two-way street. I mean, you could pick up the phone, get Dover on the line, or somebody working with him if there was any concern, if there were production problems, if there were paint problems in the car when they got delivered. I mean, I remember having a fellow by the name of Bill Donnelly, who was working under Bob at the time, who I was very close to, end up, doing a dealer visit with me here in Boston. And we ended up getting a couple of cars out of a container, and they were a mess. They were left outside before they were packed in a container, and they were probably driven on a muddy road, and he was aghast. And then, at that time, you could make the argument, you could make the comment that was like, listen, this is what we're dealing with on sort of on the ground here in the States. And you could work through problems, and they were very receptive. Warranty was great. I mean, the whole thing was really buzzing. And, being part of that premier, group at Ford, they had deep pockets. They could get into development of cars. I mean, when the Vanquish was launched, I remember going to Detroit and seeing the prototype car and bringing a couple of clients. And, that was like the 550 Maranello beater. I mean, that was the car. And you could argue which was more fun to drive. I mean, the Maranello is no slouch and is highly regarded today. And I think, the Vanquish it's a flawed car with the wrong gearbox. But it was a record breaker, I mean, for Aston Martin. So I was there when management had things tight, and they were really listening to all of the dealers on the ground all over the world. And then you come into the era of Dr. Betts, who was a complete maniac. and I don't say that with any love. I mean,
define
I always
maniac,
said when,
please.
everybody was worthless and weak compared to him. And there's nothing worse than an engineer running an automotive company because he had no sense of sales. He had no sense of balance. He was German, and I mean that in the worst way, that he wasn't listening. And he tried to grow the company in a direction as an autonomous leader. And the missteps were massive. I mean, he believed that the Rapide was a great 2+2, and it wasn't. It was a hatchback because he didn't, he would not listen to anybody about the back seats not being big enough.
I remember wedging myself into the back seats of the Rapide when it came out.
Oh,
it was painful.
The Signet, which was an absolute flop, which was that rebadged Toyota.
Yeah,
which
why,
they were going to triple the price on.
Why did they do that? So all of the other cars up till now, and the Rapide I also loved. The back seats were too small. The back seat is theoretical. Yes, but that's the case with a lot of 2+2s, right? The DB12, for example, the DB12 today that we tested, Hannah, is a 2024 car. The back seats are useless except for putting.
Yeah, but the DB12 doesn't have 4 doors.
No,
it's only got 2 doors.
But the IQ or whatever it was called, the Signet.
Yes.
Why did they make a little smart car? Why?
Well, it was the European regulations for miles per gallon across the board of your cars, I guess. I remember standing with the designer it was the first time the car was launched to us, and a handful of us went in the room, and I forget who it was at the time. I think his name was Wilson. He was brought in from Harley Davidson in Europe to help run sales, and he said, "What do you think of this?" And I said, "You shouldn't make it." And he looked at me like, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, "Wouldn't this be the perfect car for the wife of somebody buying a brand new Aston Martin?" I said, "No, a Range Rover would be the perfect car for a wife if she's not into driving." And he said, "Well, what about students?" And I just shook my head at him, and I said, "Where? Are you going to, in Athens or Rome, or where do you need this small a car?" And he said, "Well, it's green." I said, "It's not green because it has leather seats." And then everything he brought up, nobody had ever had a round table discussion with him. This was obviously coming down from Betts, and he was just aping what Betts was saying. So, that was a massive disaster. The 177, they never let journalists drive the car because they never had the car sorted out, which led to the puking of the Vulcan on the public. I mean, the Vulcan is a terrible car. It doesn't have an emergency brake in it. It was meant to be a track car only. So you have all of these things that set up failure going out of the Betts period.
And it sounds like what you're saying is somewhere along the way, Aston Martin as a company and as a brand lost touch with what it was, with its soul, and lost touch with listening to what dealers are saying people want and will want to buy. Is that what you're saying? And then also going into the Andy Palmer era, how did Andy, I mean, obviously he's not German, so we're back to the Brits, and now we've got, of course, Adrian Hallmark coming in, also British. Walk us through this part of the evolution.
You hit the nail on the head where they just stopped listening and they became dictatorial. Is that the right word? The two-way street became a one-way street that you kind of had the privilege to drive on. And all of the dealers became worthless and weak, and we weren't doing our job. And this is also the company that stopped making manual transmission cars during that period, really, which is what kept the company different. You could get a Porsche with a manual transmission, but you couldn't get anything else. And if you wanted a Grand Touring car, they stopped doing that. So going into the Andy Palmer days, now again, you have what was Andy's expertise in? I think transmissions. He was going to be the guy that was going to, change the production and bring up quality control. And he would tell you everything you wanted to hear about that. None of it really changed. I mean, it kind of did. And, Palmer's greatest act for Aston Martin was keeping the sales flat and then leaving with a $30 million golden umbrella when he left, when they came out with their IPO, which we all know is at 3% of whatever, I think, or 2% of what the original price was. I went from waving an Aston Martin flag, for many years being in the top 5 dealers in the country. Then they expanded the dealer group, and that got to be too big, and they put some of the wrong people in again because they wanted to grow. And they went from, Hannah, to your point, Aston Martin kept getting voted the coolest company, the coolest brand in the UK in the mid-aughts.
I believe it.
And, and you come out with the Daniel Craig movies and the DBS being the star of those movies, and you couldn't have gotten more positive press. And the DBS was such a great car. And then they just was like, no, we're gonna deal with a higher volume of car, and we want to do the same numbers. They kept gunning, and the edict was always, we want to be England's Ferrari. And you're closer to being Morgan than you are Ferrari with everything you've got going on. And they had it.
With the exception of design, Steve, we have to give credit to Henrik Fisker and Ian Callan. I mean, obviously, the real glory days were the DB4 and the DB5, but then those two guys made some beautiful cars, and to their credit, they offered a manual transmission in the Vantage at a time when when everyone else was stopping. So they did some things right. I remember the Vantage had really great steering at a time, like real hydraulic assist steering when everyone else was going to electric. So for a while, they were making some good moves in the 2000s.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was through the point when they started misstepping, and really the Rapide was kind of the first misstep in terms of what it could have been. And it's funny you bring up Fisker because I was reading in the paper about how his company is, again, barely treading water. And Heinrich, insider sort of baseball here, would take credit for designs that Ian did before Heinrich got to the company, if you want to know that personality. He took credit for a mid-engine car that Ian designed that very few people know about within Aston Martin. And he took that because nobody knew about it. He said it was his idea. And I've never seen Ian so upset when this got back to him. And he also took credit for the Vanquish, which was Ian's baby. I have the sketch still in my office of the original sort of silhouette of the car. But yeah, I mean, Heinrich is Heinrich. And, I think with me being incredibly harsh, a lot of this falls on Merrick Reichman now, because within the dealer group, we would say you can't keep exaggerating the same line and call that design. If I'm going to be a critic of what the cars I used to sell, they became cartoony versus elegant off of these original shapes. I mean, the original V8 that was done, was an elegant little car. The DB9, you look back at it, is aged beautifully. And you get into the DB11, I always used to say it was like driving a pool table.
I want to get your take on this, Hannah. We both know the DB12. My first impression and my continued thought is it's gorgeous. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful.
Pretty. It's a pretty car.
Prettier than almost anything else. The DB12 has a V8? I thought it was going to be a 12. I feel like that's a little bit of a disappointment, right? I mean, plus it has the same ZF 8-speed transmission that my Dodge has. Now, I love my Dodge, but it's not an Aston Martin. I was hoping for a DCT or a manual transmission, but that's not available. Hannah, what did you think about the DB12?
I agree. I think it's one of the best looking cars on the road. My quibble with it, like we've talked about this before, I'm fine with the V8. I'm not bothered by it. It's got plenty of power. It's almost 700 horsepower. That's fine. I'm not going to quibble about that. It's fast, but there's something about it that feels like you say, it's just really, it feels big. It's lumbering. It's lumbering. And the interior, there's something off with the space because it feels like a wide, big, heavy car to drive. And yet inside you're feeling a little bit cramped, like you're in kind of a pod with this huge, center console separating your two little pods. It just doesn't feel spacious and nimble in the way that a 911 does. And I'm sorry to keep bringing it back to, the other two from Stuttgart, but at the end of the day, in my opinion, things from Aston Martin need to be as good or better than things from Porsche and Mercedes in order to be competitive. And right now, it feels like it's maybe the third option.
And the powertrain, I think, is a Mercedes powertrain, right? It's a twin turbocharged 4-liter V8. Yeah, I'm happy with the power, but I'd rather have my Challenger 6.4 liter. It only has 485 horsepower, but at least I feel like it sounded better. It was more responsive somehow.
Yeah.
And the leather in the Aston Martin, I felt very GM. The infotainment system is nothing like the Mercedes.
Not as good.
But I thought they sourced that technology.
Me too.
I'm confused about it.
Serio, maybe you can enlighten us. Aston Martin has so much going for it. It's got a lot of money from very rich Saudi Arabian backers. It's got a glamorous Formula One team. It's got a charismatic billionaire leader. It's got a heap of brand awareness and fans and people who want it to succeed, including myself. I mean, the whole reason why we're talking about this today, and maybe it feels like a bash fest, but it's because we love it. And I literally cannot figure out, why is it being held back? I don't know. I can't figure it out.
Before I answer that, it's interesting that you don't put the Bentley Continental GT in the same breath as the DB12, because
certainly not. Certainly not. It's on a higher level.
Okay, so that's interesting, because that was always at dealer level. I mean, and Hannah, that I have one for the reason of sitting in it. When you're sitting in it, you feel like you're sitting in just a bucket of wealth. I mean, engineering prowess and everything that's tactile makes you go, this is why this costs a lot of money.
But it's quite a bit more expensive. Can we say
fair enough. But the Aston should.
It's not as good, but Steve, it's not as good looking also. The Bentley I love too, despite the way it looks. I love also, the leather, the quality is high. The responsiveness is great. It doesn't look nearly as beautiful as the Aston Martin is gorgeous.
Well, the Aston Martin is more elegant. The Bentley's brutish. It looks, it looks like a cinder block coming down the road at times. Yes. I mean, it is what it is. And the Aston they've always built just gorgeous things, which I think is what hooks a lot of people. It's kind of always been the problem with the small car company. I mean, you look back at their history, they always made beautifully flawed cars. For a period of, the V8 Vantage from the 80s was a brute, gorgeous thing tech-wise that was from the 60s. So if you look at the history of the car company, they were always playing the game of, we're going to build a beautiful car. You don't buy them for the technology. You buy them for the beauty and the brutishness and the fact that it's handmade. And for a long period of time, you could have got it in any color combination with exterior color and leather trim. I think they fall on their because they're still a small car company thinking like a big car company, and they don't have the leadership. I mean, the leadership in the United States was comical after a while. And I could name names, and you probably would just get everybody in trouble on the other end of the pod here if I went down that road. But you look at the people they put in charge, and it's like, how did you pick these people? And it was kind of endemic of what was going on in the UK. There's always been misery at the top of the food chain. I got out of it because when they put all of their eggs in the DBX basket, and they thought they were going to sell, I think when I left in October of 2020, the DBX was about to come out. I had no interest in selling it because it was just not my cup of tea. It's not why I got involved in the car world. And I think it's been, in terms of volume, I would say a failure compared to Urus, Bentayga, the Ferrari,
Purosangue.
Thank you. Yeah, Purosangue. And they were constantly trying to play catch up.
Well, I'm glad. Wait, hang on. I'm glad you bring up the DBX because, and this is what makes a market. I adore it.
The 707 I love too.
I love the DBX, and I love the way it drives. I love the way it sounds. The DBS impressed me in a lot of ways that the DB12 doesn't. And I'm more of a soccer mom maybe than you, Steve. So I like the room in it. I think it's better looking than almost all of its competitors. I just think it's...
And you get the same engine in a G-Wagon for how much more money?
Right. Well, they're all 4-liter. They're all twin-turbo 4-liter V8s, right? They're using the Mercedes motor. And I had that same engine in my G-Wagon, and I loved it in that. For some reason, I don't like it in the DB12. But I think the DBX is great, and it's been a disappointment in terms of sales. Maybe it's the price problem. They just are priced too high.
I think it's the price problem. Yeah.
Well,
if you priced it right at the G63, you'd probably sell 3 times as many of them. For another $100,000, how do you justify it with the old Mercedes tech in the car? If their business plan when Andy Palmer was getting, his golden umbrella, was to lean heavily on the new facility in Wales, and for the longest time, when Palmer first got involved, he swore up and down they were never going to build that car. So here is, in essence, the problem with the company. You tell your dealer network when you become the head of the company, you're never going to build an SUV. You might build something called a crossover, but you're never going to build an SUV. What did they do? They built an SUV, and then they hinged the whole company upon it. So if it fails, now you've got to backpedal and go back towards, get all your engineers to now refocus on refreshing Vantage, refreshing DB11. And where's your Halo car? The Velour?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I
That's
love
another
that
thing.
car.
I actually like how that
it.
looks too.
I love it.
But it's not in what kind of volume for how much money?
Well, please
I
make
love
more
the
of
idea
those.
of it.
Please
Right.
make more V12s
Right.
with a manual transmission that looks like, a throwback to the original Vantage. I love the Velour, but I want to get Hannah's take on the DBX.
Second-gen Victor.
Yeah,
Hannah,
back to the DBX. Back to the DBX.
You mentioned you like the 707.
Yes, and I will own up to it because I reviewed that last year, and I actually said in that review that you should drive it before you drive the Lamborghini Urus because I think it's interesting, and I'm talking specifically about the 707 model. I just think it's interesting and different. The problem with that is that it's like $50,000 more than the others in the competitive segment, which is what you guys just said. But that's part of Aston Martin's current strategy to raise profit margins to try to bump it up into something profitable. I mean, their whole strategy
It's a big problem.
Raise
if I can get a
prices.
Cayenne Turbo for so much less, then I'm gonna. Even if I like the Aston Martin looks better, the Cayenne Turbo is obviously going to work better and last longer.
Yeah,
right?
I thought the 707 actually was exciting to drive. It just was interesting. It's something different. I love a G-Wagon. But frankly, the Porsche SUVs are wonderful, but they are really ubiquitous. So part of my attraction to the 707 is I thought it looked very cool, and it's something different. If you have the cash to spend, you're not going to be disappointed.
I like it better than the Audi Urus for sure.
Me too.
Okay.
Oh, the Audi Urus, yes.
That's not a Lamborghini. Come on.
I actually like the Lamborghini too. But
the big anchor around the neck of modern Aston Martins is what? It's residual value. So you're going to get the guy that goes and buys the first DBX, and he's going to use it for 4 years, and then he's going to come in, be told it's worth nothing, and he's not going to buy a second one.
Good.
Well,
I'll pick it up used.
I'll
pick it up used.
That's another problem with overproduction and cars. I know the local dealer is sitting on cars that have probably had 3 birthdays.
I did want to ask you about that because when I was in Seville driving the Vantage, I was asking, the Aston Martin folks there, tell me about your production discipline. And they were very above board with the fact that they were not disciplined. They didn't handle production well. It sounded like, and you can share your experience, but they would just overproduce things and in an unpredictable manner, and which made it impossible as a dealer to really run a business with a high-priced luxury object because the whole allure is not being able to get one.
Well, and that was the last nail in my coffin. I was, as you can imagine, a pebble in the shoe of the company for a long time because I would speak up along with a handful of other dealers. And when they said, we don't want you to carry $3 million worth of DBXs, we want you to carry 6. And I said, okay, where do I go? How do I get out of this? Because you're never going to put that many cars. And the philosophy is a simple one, and it's the biggest mistake out of any manufacturer. they have a factory. Subsequently, the factory should be making something. So if we're opening our doors and we have employees that can build, well, we need them to build. And it doesn't matter if the consumer is not high on the uptake. We're going to build them, and you're the problem if you can't sell them. And that goes back to the management mindset of the dealers are all wrong. And, you can sum up the company by looking at Valkyrie or Valhalla. Now, Valkyrie was announced and Valhalla was announced while I was still there. And if the Valkyries are getting delivered finally, Valhalla's never, as far as I know, other than the one in the James Bond movie in the background, in the wind tunnel thing that they had in the last movie, I wouldn't know anymore either. Maybe it's about to get launched. But those were the two things that were going to be the massive Halo, Enzo fighters, LaFerrari fighters. These are the things that are going to go after 918.
And make a lot of money,
come on.
By the way.
And there are lawsuits about who put up the money to, again, inside baseball. Aston Martin didn't have the money to build Valkyrie, so they had to borrow the money from people. And, okay, now when those people don't get their return on their money, the lawsuits start, flying because, hey, they're not building the car the way they said they were going to. And now you've got customers that, when Valkyrie was built, you would have to buy a tariff in order to jump the line on the Valkyrie. Now, think about that for a second. So they're going to play the Ferrari thing of, well, you want an 812, you have to buy everything else underneath it, and preferably from dealer stock in multiples. And Aston can't play that.
Let's talk about the cars for a minute, and I want to do two things. Hannah, I want to get you to tell us about the new Vantage. Because, again, I think it's beautiful. In fact, Barry Ritholtz, when it first came out, messaged me and said, please put me in touch with Aston. I want to put in my order for this already. So I want to know what you think about that. And then, Steve, I want to talk about Velour for a second, because I didn't even know about it until last week, and it's been around for a year. And to me, it's perfect. So Hannah, first the Vantage.
Okay, the Vantage, I drove it on the track in Spain, and then I drove it on a 100-mile road course outside Sevilla. Beautiful car. We've covered that. This is the third generation, starting price at $191,000, which I actually thought was relatively fair compared to the 911 Turbo and the AMG GT.
I want it in orange, by the way. The same way. The picture that you have in your story, it's awesome.
You can have orange. I won't fight you for it. I'll have the silver, please. So beautiful car. And I was so happy that they have swapped out those buttons that you push to put it into drive and neutral and reverse. They put in an actual lever to shift gears, as it were.
I liked the buttons.
That's an improvement. It's certainly fast, rear wheel drive, 0 to 60 in 3.4 or so. I mean, it's competitive. It actually, my takeaway on driving that car was I am so used to driving cars that now have rear axle steering. And that really make me feel like I'm a better driver than I am.
Oh, fancy you.
And sure, call it a crutch if you want, but, I kind of love it because I feel like I'm an incredible driver when I'm in those cars. So then when I get into the Vantage and it does not have that, bumper system, so to speak, it can get squirrely. And that's exciting, and it's also taxing. So when I was on the track, I'm doing laps, and there is the A-pillars are a bit of a blind spot. When you're turning deep into a corner, I'm looking right at an A-pillar, which is not great when you want to see where you're going. But, very thrilling car to drive. But again, it honestly just feels wide, and it's not as heavy as the 911 Turbo, but it feels heavier because of what's underneath. Okay, Steve, go.
Steve, I want to get. Do you have a take, Steve? Do you have a take on, because obviously it's brand new, or it's a 2023 model,
third
right?
generation. Yep.
So, do you have a take, Steve? Because I think, it looks beautiful, and I
2025
love
model.
I love Hannah's review, and even the things that maybe she thinks are downsides, I think
Yeah,
it's an
it's
upside.
not bad.
I want it to get squirrely on me,
Certainly. Not bad, just an observation.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, they always sold the cars on the fact that they were more analog than they were high tech, and I would put rear wheel steering as high tech. I just giggle at the fact that I don't know what the percentage is, but I would bet it's less than 10 of Aston Martin owners that take their cars on the track, and I still marvel at the fact that they'll do a press launch at a track. They should do it crossing the Alps, and they should do it in real world driving situations.
Agreed.
So the press can go, oh, this is what it's like to own one.
The DB12 launch was in Monaco, and that was a beautiful drive. So you're exactly right.
Wait,
Steve.
Hannah, can you get it with a manual
Yes.
transmission, the new Vantage?
No.
Oh, come on. Come on.
I don't.
Let's kill the company further by
You know,
not building
I
a
don't think
manual
anyone's
transmission
asking for
sports
that.
car.
Sadly, I'm sorry, but I do not think
I've been hearing
people are asking for that.
I don't believe it. Look on BAT. Which Vantages bring the most money? If it has a manual transmission, it's instantly got a premium. Instantly. This is a real bummer to me. Well,
my market was always the anomaly because unlike the rest of the country, we would sell 75% coupe versus Volante, and we would sell 80 or 85% manual instead of automatic.
Wow.
And if you compare those numbers to the dealers in California, they're completely backwards. And when they stopped building manual transmission cars and our sales, fundamentally were halved overnight, the marketing people were like, how come you're selling fewer cars? It's because you took the manual transmission box out of them. So
maybe it's an East Coast, West Coast thing.
It's an East Coast all the way to Chicago. To go back to Velour, Matt, it's the second gen Victor. Did you see the Victor that was made, the one-off car?
I saw it.
Made in the spirit of Victor Gauntlet?
I saw it in one of Shmee's videos. You know, the YouTube kid?
Yes.
We
really need video on this podcast.
He's prolific. He went to somebody had a collection with like all of these continuation cars and some weird like chop top Aston and this what I think is absolutely beautiful Velour, which has a 5.2 liter V12. It has a manual transmission. It's got that 80s kind of Mustang look of a. I just thought it. Why not make more? But I think they only made 110 because it was an anniversary car, right?
Well, and how much are they? They
were like £1.5 million, I think.
Yeah. I mean, how many of them can you sell? That was always the thing where when the first V12 Zagato came out, that car was the $700,000 right at the worst time when the economy was taking a tank in 08, 09. And instead of selling 100, they sold 61. And that's the thing. It was with the same problem with my shooting brake that I have. Why did they only sell 14 of them in North America out of the 99 cars? Well, they were $875,000. And that's you're always chasing that. It's too much money for people that know cars. You can sell things to small markets when the markets are hot, whether that's the Chinese market or the Arab markets. When those go quiet, where's the rest of the world picking up the slack?
So Steve,
and I love the Velour.
My last question for you really is over everything.
It's a doozy.
If you're now top dog at Aston, how do you fix this?
If Lawrence Stroll hires you after hearing this podcast,
right,
what do you do?
Right. Because we do want to fix it. We do believe in this company and this brand. We're big fans. How do we fix something that we love?
The unpopular answer, if I were the omnipotent king of Aston Martin, would be years ago become part of Mercedes-Benz. You have to be part of something else. You have to be part of another car company, or you're going to be left in the dust. Rolls-Royce is part of BMW. Bentley is part of Volkswagen. Lamborghini's part of, you know the story.
Yes.
And Aston Martin is sitting there going, well, we're the last independent company. Yes. And you're suffering because of it. So swallow your pride. But I don't think, over the years, there have been many companies that have tried. Geely tried in China, and they put up this, nope, we don't want to do that. So you can keep taking money from the Emirates. They lived off Kuwaiti money forever. Then that ran out. So they went to the Saudis, and now they're sticking money in. and the Saudis essentially saving McLaren and Aston from, if I get
Yes.
that right. So how long can you keep doing that? The world moves at too fast a pace to be independent anymore. So I would try to look for, a sugar daddy manufacturer. And if there isn't one, well, how long can this red ink go on for?
Well,
And
they
how long,
could go.
Hannah, I think I've said to you, Lawrence Stroll will look like a genius on one hand because his Formula One team will be worth billions of dollars or
Yes.
$1 billion anyway, where the car company's not going to be worth the dirt that it's standing on because no one's going to care after a while. But he'll still come out with his friends who put money in the company looking like a genius because of, Formula One. And that's a whole different thing.
I'll tell you
So,
what I would, what I wonder, Steve, is you made a comment that they make their money on, or that their reputation is being more analog than high tech. And that's what I loved about the first Vantage that I drove maybe 15 years ago, was that it had a stick, the steering was on point, and there were no turbos, it was rear wheel drive. Like, what if they went all that direction? Because their infotainment is no good anyway, and they're not going to have the money to do the rear wheel steering thing. They don't need to use a ZF Auto slush box. Like, what if they went all analog? Wouldn't that be a coup?
Well, that was when the V8 first gen came out, the Vantage rather. It was meant to be a $99,000 car, and you just described what they wanted to build. And then Dr. Betts kept creeping it up. Thank God he didn't name the Volante the Reverso, because that was his first name for the car. And the dealer network went, Reverso? Wait, that's not going to play with a car that goes forward. Yeah, you just hit the nail right on the head. And it's a conversation I just had with Donald Osborne when he rented a Lotus Elise in England, when he said, this is what I want Porsche to build, or I want Lotus to build just this. I want a simple car that's all analog. And I just said, Donald, those days, they're gone. But Matt, you hit the nail right on the head. If you could dumb it down tech-wise and put all the grunt in it and build, for lack of a better analogy, a better Mustang with great style and great, the quality of the materials in the car, where everything is, making you go back to it and drive it and drive it and drive it and drive it and go after the drivers instead of the posers or whoever, I don't know, the boulevard years. Sure.
No screens, three
I love
pedals.
the idea.
So that was Steve Serio. We're so grateful for his insight and perspective, as always. It's always great to be able to follow the sort of trajectory of a brand.
How many brands has he dealt with, by the way?
I don't know, but there's Lotus, there's Spiker.
Spiker.
Remember Spiker?
Yes.
Yeah.
My neighbor, Eric, really wants a Spiker still.
Still?
Yeah.
I mean, where would you even find one?
Do you see them on BAT? Do they classic cars? Maybe Supercar Blondie will sell one on her platform.
SBX.
In any case, he has a wide range of experience, and I think he may become one of our regular guests because he has such incredible knowledge.
Yeah, and I actually kind of liked his idea about how he would fix the company. It actually makes sense.
Selling it to a big conglomerate?
Well, yeah. Then you get protection and money.
I liked, brace yourself, I liked my idea. I thought my idea was brilliant.
When in doubt, go analog.
You know why I've been thinking about this a lot lately, because the new Ford Bronco, which is a shape that I love, but a lot of people want to put a V8 in it, and apparently it's too difficult because of the computers and the wiring and all the technology. And I want somebody just to rip out the wire harness and the screens and just put an old motor in it with no ABS, no traction control, and just go totally analog on that thing.
I'm sure there are some resto mod guys in California doing that. And
no one's done it yet. I don't think any.
I find that impossible.
This is something I'd love to get our listeners to chime in on. Has anybody V8 swapped a new Ford Bronco?
Surely.
I don't think so. Our email address is hotpursuit@bloomberg.net. Message me if you think anyone has V8 swapped a new Bronco. I don't think it's possible.
We'll find out.
What have you got going on next week? What are you doing?
Ooh, you know what? I'm going to Italy next week. A little bit of a vacation, but I'm also going to Villa d'Este end of next weekend. So
I've heard you say Villa d'Este, and I've heard other wealthy people say it, but I don't know what it is. What is Villa d'Este?
Villa d'Este is a car show on Lake Como. Picture it like Picture it like a very, very small version of Pebble Beach. It's a car concours, and it's on Lake Como. BMW is going to be unveiling some concepts. BMW it's kind of their thing. They're gonna unveil an art car and a concept car there. So yeah,
do you know,
really nice.
If you talk to them before you go, you should try and get the new BMW R9T. So it's a motorcycle.
The motorcycle.
But
I've had it.
Yes, no, I have had 2 R9Ts. It's one of my favorite motorcycles, but they have a brand new version of it, which has a slightly different name. It's kind of the same thing, but the reason I say that is that Villa d'Este or Lake Como is in Sud Tirol, and it's one of my favorite places in the whole world to ride motorcycles. All right, well, I don't think I'm doing anything special. I've been diving deep into the Subaru world. So I've been driving a Crosstrek.
I'm speechless.
Well, you know what the reason is? So first of all, because one of my buddies gave me a Crosstrek to drive for a while. I really like it. It's kind of a dog. It has 182 horsepower, flat 4. But I like the motor, even though it's 0 to 60 in like 10 seconds. So then I started looking at the, the BRZ, which has a more powerful version. I think it's a turbocharged 2.4 liter with 228 horsepower. So I'm going to drive that to see. I've never driven a BRZ. They've been around forever. And I want to get my mom into an Outback because it's like a great mom wagon. Totally. And they have, I think, an even more powerful motor available in that. So, and I'm loving the $30,000 price tag because I think everything is too expensive. And after I saw the BYD Seagull, that's the Chinese electric car that goes for 10 grand, I was thinking, why do we have to pay so much for cars?
It's not fair.
Part of it is tariffs and protectionism, and that's obviously going to increase. But, man, I think we should be able to pay. We should get cheaper cars. All right, that's all we have for Hot Pursuits this week. We'll see you back same time, same place next week. I'm Matt Miller.
And I'm Hannah Elliott, and this is Bloomberg.